Dignitas are among the many teams that are just going with a budget roster this year. With a disappointing 2023 with key pieces like Jensen as their mid laner and Santorin as their jungler, they've thrown their cornerstones away and have produced a lineup of Rich, eXyu, Dove, Tomo, and Isles. We're going to go through each player and see how strong this lineup is and if they can do any damage this season. Let's get it. Rich is staying with Dignitas for 2024 after having played with them in 2023. Rich was actually somewhat of a bright spot for Dignitas, as he would occasionally be a win condition for them, but most games were won through Jensen. Rich is a very inconsistent player, sometimes solo killing the enemy top laner, such as one of the best laners in Summit, and other times getting solo killed by himself by the likes of Someday. This type of variance is definitely not a good thing, and given that he's the piece that Dignitas decided to build around, I think this is one of the worst win conditions you can have for a roster. Not only is Rich so inconsistent, but he's also going to be one of the oldest players of the roster as well, as the person that's going to be leading their new Korean mid laner Dove. What also makes no sense is that Dignitas don't even have Korean coaching staff, so now it's just going to be two Korean players completely disconnected from the rest of the team. Can we also mention that Dignitas keep calling him the faker of Heroes of the Storm, even though he's been playing League of Legends since 2019? If Dignitas keep clinging to this old narrative, maybe I'll just still keep bringing up how they didn't pay their interns for the longest time. I'm still not going to make shitty game guides for you, Sui. They shootin'. eXyu joined Dignitas as their rookie jungler. This guy comes from Dignitas Academy for 2023 Spring, where he placed second, where he had Insanity as his mid laner. eXyu comes back from a Korean boot camp, as Dignitas was one of the teams to drop their Academy roster. eXyu is known in solo queue for his Lee Sin, Graves, and Nidalee, but it looks like he also showed some growth as he's played a lot of Sejuani in 2023 Spring professionally. Since he's basically like every other jungler from solo queue with that gank style champion pool, I think he's definitely going to struggle in Spring Split, and this might be the worst year to make your pro debut, as the jungle is changing so significantly with the map that he's just going to have a hell of a time learning pro jungle routes and meta champions. He'll have no time to focus on the fundamentals. I really think eXyu is going to struggle in the Spring Split. Dove joins Dignitas for the mid lane, and he's coming from the LPL from Spring 2023 and teamless in 2023 Summer. You can already tell this is just a bad omen. The good thing is, Dove previously played as a top laner in LCK for Live Sandbox in 2022 Summer, but he is traditionally a mid laner. I'm always a big fan of players that have played a previous role, as it gives you a much greater perspective on how your team is supposed to play the game as a whole. Dove's champion pool consists of Azir and Ryze, so this tells me that this guy is probably a passive player that just looks to scale and play for the team fights. Now, granted, I've never watched any of Dove's games, but since he did play with Summit and Live Sandbox in 2020, maybe he's been conditioned already to be a stable laner, which will also work in this case with Rich as his top laner. Hey yo, I know you're enjoying this fire ass content right now, but I need you to subscribe so you can get the latest on player interviews, documentaries, and analytical videos. I'm dropping bombs all in the off season, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Appreciate it, and back to the video. Tomo stays with Dignitas for 2024 Spring Split, and this is probably the most disappointing LCS signing out of all the teams, aside from maybe Quid on 100 Thieves. But like I said with Quid, this clearly just shows that Tomo is a budget piece, and to top it all off, if we look at the contract database earlier in the year, we can see that Tomo was originally signed until the end of 2024, and he certainly can't be traded for a buyout, so Dignitas basically have to run Tomo or spend more money to acquire another player. That said, Tomo was probably the worst aspect of Dignitas in 2023, where he looked terrible with Ignar in the Spring Split, and then in Summer, where he played with Poom. And as I referenced in my video about how pro teams tower dive before Worlds started, Tomo could be routinely seen not fighting for the minion wave, which would often result in him getting tower dove and completely ruining the game for Dignitas. I'm sorry to say, but I just don't see any upside in having Tomo as your ADC, as he's clearly not LCS level. But the one saving grace that I'll give is that he did in fact have his support switched out in 2023 summer from Diamond to Poom, so that could have had an effect on his own performance. But with that level of play that we saw, I cannot contribute most of that to synergy issues with a support. Isles has been brought on for support for Dignitas, and if you've ever heard of the phrase forged by fire, that's what's going to be happening here. He was briefly brought into the Cloud9 main roster for 2022 in the playoffs, and actually took a series against Golden Guardians, but then eventually lost to EG, who went on to win the entire split. Now, Isles competed for some amateur teams in 2023, but with a shattered academy system, that's not really going to prepare him for the LCS. The upside of Isles is that he has been rank 1 on and off this year with 1931 peak LP. He has also held 3 accounts in the top 10 of Challenger at the same time. This guy is an absolute stud in solo queue, excelling on Nautilus, Rakan, Rel, and he even has good experience with Karma and Pro Play, so it's not like he just plays engaged supports. If there's a player that you could bet on out of all the amateurs in NA, Isles is not a bad choice. Of course, the problem is always converting that dominance in solo queue to pro play, which support is notoriously difficult to do as it's such a different role in professional play. If Isles can prove he's a good support on Nightmare mode with Tomo and Rich, he'll definitely be sought after for 2025. Also, might I just add that Dignitas only signed him for 2024, so they don't even intend to build Isles up, which makes zero sense from a GM perspective. Overall, I think this is the weakest roster in the LCS, and I expect them to place dead last for Spring Split, and I really don't see any upside to this roster. This is basically a placeholder team for Dignitas as they waited out for an exit from the LCS, and it's a shame that the construction of this roster doesn't make sense on paper, theoretically, or even to just build talent. This is one of the worst constructions of a roster I've ever seen, but feel free to meme me if this ends up being wrong. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to one of the few making this type of content. We keep it moving all through the off season. We out. Peace.